Okay, so effectively the last thing we've got to do is we've got to put this dust cover on. What I wanted you to pay note to is that these dust covers are often missing this shield with the shifter boot. When I say shifter boot, I mean that the shifter fork goes through it. That almost is always gone. You can get that replaced, and you probably should, because you don't necessarily want dirt and debris traveling around the inside of the transmission belt housing. Okay, so we're going to take the drive shaft out because we're going to go get universal joints tomorrow. And this applies the same way as the front, where it's connected to the first half of the drive shaft. You should always mark them. Anyway, the reason you mark them is because oftentimes these things are balanced as a two-piece section. And if you reconnect them offset, you might pick up a wicked vibration. So, we're going to start getting this thing off of here. Now, as much as I encourage people to tackle as much of this as they can, I gotta tell you, universal joints aren't something I encourage you to try on these, because it's a real pain in the keister. The old ones usually never want to come out very easily, and you have to uncap the new ones. It's a good chance you'll lose the needle bearing. You'll be tempted to use it minus a needle bearing. It's not going to last. So this is one of those deals where, if I were you, I'd dismantle it off the car, okay? But I'd take it to some schmo that does this stuff for a living, let him press the new bearings on. Excuse me, press the new universal joints on. I'm not even a big fan of doing it. Now, these drive shafts, especially this end piece that ties into the differential, these bolts are very, very special bolts that are specifically designed just for this job. They may look innocent enough, but believe you me, they're not. So my point is, if you're doing this job, set these bolts aside so they are not to be confused with anything else. Up till a couple years ago, if you didn't have these bolts, you didn't have an option. Nobody was reproducing these bolts. And I know that sounds nuts, but when you think about the tensile strength in these bolts, you think about the specific design of the shoulder, which is like a 9mm shoulder. Very unusual bolt. So if you lost them, you were just in a world of trouble. Okay, so the drive shaft's out. There's just nothing there. In fact, if you rock it back and forth ever so slightly, you can feel a little bit of slop. This had to be rebuilt anyway. Okay, so this is what we're talking about right here. Somebody put a screw where the Zerk fitting is supposed to be. The Zerk fitting is how we were able to grease this. Obviously, without a grease port, these bearings are, their days are numbered. So this is why we had to change them. And the common sense approach is, if you change one, you might as well change the other. Okay, so today we're going to go ahead and change out the universal joints on the second part of the drive shaft. The reason we're doing this instead of sending it out is because I kind of want to get this project back on the road. And if I send the drive shaft out, it could take me a while to get this done. It's something we can do. I kind of hate doing it, to be honest with you, because it is an immense pain in the butt to do. And the reason it's so difficult to do on an Alpha as opposed to, I don't know, any American-made drive shaft is the Alpha drive shafts, and I'll show you later, they're tapered in, so you can't press them square in your press. So you have to make a tool in order to keep the device squared as you're trying to press in the new bearing. Now, we learned a long time ago, trying to press these out is a bit of a ridiculous joke. It's unnecessary. So what we do is we remove them from the assembly, then we just cut the universal joint out, and then we just press out the caps. I am not a strong supporter of the idea of you trying to do this at home to save yourself a couple bucks. This is why. One, it is real easy to lose just one needle bearing out of one of the cups. And two, you technically need some special tools to make this happen. These are the tools that we've made to be able to press these in and out. You don't have this at home. Okay, now the other thing we're going to try to do while we're at it today is we've got our new Guibo in, and we got what's called Guibo savers, or jewel savers, I should say. We're going to put these on as well, and I'll explain what these are all about when we get to that point. But for now, I'm going to start stripping this down, and you can see what this process is all about. You know, originally this wasn't something we were looking to do, but in fact, the minute we saw that one of these had a screw in it instead of a grease fitting, kind of determined the story for us. Okay, now this is where our special tools come into play. Okay, so this is our receiver for the bearing caps. And this is a tool that you'll see a little bit later that holds everything in place to compensate for the fact that the yoke is out of square as compared to like an American drive shaft. But for now, we're just going to press out some bearings so they just need to go. Okay, so we got the universal joints separated from the drive shaft, and now you can see what the value of these tools that we had to make is all about. This is a special coupler that's cut on angle to match this tapered angle. You can see these are not squared, so you can't press square down on them. So you need something to compensate for this angle. So we made this jig that when it sits in there, this is now squared up and we can press it out. I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so now that it's sitting in the jig, we're going to use our 50mm impact socket. And you can see now everything is squared up and pressing. See, right now, if I didn't have this special tool down here, what would happen is this would press this out of alignment and it would dull the edges or the, you know, this just makes much more lighter of the work. And you can see why I'm kind of suggesting that this isn't something you really want to tackle at home. This is not a fun job. Okay, so once you have one side broke free, then you're going to take the cap out, and then you flip it over, press the other way out, and it'll come right off. I'll show you what that looks like now. Okay, so usually this will spin right off, but this has been pretty much an uphill battle ever since I started this project, so I'm not going to assume it is. That's why I'm going to clamp it down, just in case he wants to fight me to come off. Okay, there. Now this is pop free. Like I said, these usually don't give you a whole lot of arguments once you get them past the receiver. And here's the needle bearings. See, if you attempt to tackle this yourself, and you lose just one of those needle bearings, these little guys right here, if you lose just one, try and do this yourself, on the new ones that is, it's not going to last. It just won't last long at all. So, believe me, this is one of the most aggravating jobs that we do. And when that's the case, it's not worth your time and effort to make all the tooling to do this for a one-time job. You know, pressing universal joints is not exactly a major job nor a complicated job, but it is a major pain of a job. What prompted this whole thing was that you can see this screw sticking out of here. There's no way to service that universal joint. So with that said, it's hard to tell how long this has been this way. So that's why we're doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish tearing these apart, then I'm going to go put them in the parts washer, clean them up. I'm going to make sure that none of the bores are galled, and then we're going to press the rest of them in tomorrow, because it's getting to the end of the day as it is. So if I haven't said it enough yet, I'll say it one more time. This is not a fun job. It's not a practical job to do because it takes a lot of time and energy. And I would just suggest that if you are suspect that your universal joints are shot, don't risk them being a failure when you're on the road. So just, you know, take the drive shaft out, take it to a drive shaft shop. This is a perfect opportunity not only to get new universal joints put in, but while it's there, get it balanced. You will be amazed how improved the experience of driving that car is if you have a balanced drive shaft. Okay, so the last job I'm going to do before I head out for the day is I'm going to put in the new Guibo and Giulia Supers. And I think I've already said this a few times by now, but if you're not familiar with what the Giulia Super is, it's probably one of the most relevant safety devices developed in a very long time. What it does is, you see how this is bolted to the Guibo, okay? 3 out of the 6 points. The other 3 points attached to the transmission. But if this lets go at any point where this is allowed to break free, there's nothing to stop this from flying into the cab of the car and just ripping the floor to pieces, which is what it does when that happens. So somebody was clever enough to come up with what they call Giulia Super. Basically what it is it doesn't affect the flexing capabilities of the Guibo, which is pretty important on a street car, but it does limit it from being able to separate if something were to happen or if the Guibo were to eventually break. And this one is certainly past it. This one's got a lot of cracks in it. It's most likely original to the car. You know, for no more than what a Guibo costs in Guibo Supers, it's a no-brainer. We're just changing it out. Changing it out primarily because there's a lot of cracks in it, though. Okay, so those locking nuts that come on these things, those are pretty important too. If for whatever reason yours are missing, make sure you use aviation-style nuts, something to keep your bolts from backing out and becoming very dangerous to the driving experience of your car. You rebuild the car. Universal joints, Guibo and Guibo Super. Transmission, new transmission mounting bushings. I think we've done quite a bit already. Once I get this off of here, for those of you that don't know, I'll explain what that strap that's on the new Guibo is all about. Okay, this is the original Guibo. There is a difference between this one and the one we're putting in. Okay, so the old one, and we may be in high def, but I know you can't see this. The old one has cracks around every one of the mounting studs. But if you notice, the original one, these are solid steel sleeves. The replacement ones, the resistance welded clamshell style sleeves. There's pros and cons to this. The steel, no matter whether it's an original one or this one, is vulcanized rubber to the steel. When you create a flat surface like this, you create more ability for the vulcanization process to happen. That's a pro. A con is that these sleeves are resistance welded together, so they could, in theory, split apart. I can't say I've seen that happen before, but it's still just a noted thought. We used to always be adamant about getting the exact replacement ones, but those are far and few between. You can't get them anymore. So this is effectively what we're left to getting. Now, there's a steel strap on here. Now, for those of you that know alphas in and out, this is boring to you. But for those who don't know, if you have to replace your Guibo, do not cut this strap off until everything is assembled in the car. Then you have to cut the strap off. Don't leave it on. Okay, what this strap is doing is it's keeping the rubber contained, compressed, in other words, so the bolts will fit back in there. If you cut this early, this is going to expand a little bit, and it's going to be a nightmare trying to get all the bolts back on again. Okay? Okay, so now it's time to put our Guibo and Guibo savers on. Like my makeshift table. All the equipment's still at the other shop, so tables included. Okay, so the one that goes to the inside, I'm going to put that to the opposite of the bolting of the drive shaft. That way, it's going to bolt up with the transmission side. This one, however, I'm going to bolt up with the drive shaft, but it's going to be on the opposite side of the Guibo. Okay, so now this is how it looks. This one is going to be the opposite as this one. Okay, so as you can see, what they're going to do is they're not going to interfere with the Guibo's ability to flex, absorbing torque, but they will keep the Guibo from separating if anything should ever happen. Okay, so now it's time to bolt this bad boy up. Now it's time for this. So we'll torque them down a little bit more, and then we'll put the locking nuts on them and put it in the transmission. Alright, so we pre-greased the end of the drive shaft, so when it goes back onto the pivot, that it's, lubricated as it needs to be. This is where the fun starts. Now I'm hitting the Guibo, not the threads of the bolt. And you're gonna have to find your own clever little ways of doing this stuff. But effectively all you really gotta do is get enough threads exposed for you to get the nut on there, and it all cinches itself down. Okay, I got enough threads. This time it's time to use the impact and start tightening this thing down. The drive shaft job, it's labor intensive. There's just no two ways about it. This is definitely one of those jobs I recommend. If you got the guts to do it, go for it. But you also have to be sensible about it, because if you don't have enough tooling, it's going to be a horrible job to do. And you get to doing this all day, your hands start to cramp up, and you start to get frustrated. And that's when you got to cup check yourself. If you're starting to get frustrated at your job and you're no longer enjoying it, don't do it. Alright. Okay, so all the primary bolts have been torqued down and I'm happy with what the settings are. Now remember, if you use these Guibos, this type of Guibo saver, it's one goes through this bolt pattern, the other goes through this bolt pattern on the opposite side. Basically you're just offsetting them so that they tie together without locking down the Guibo's ability to still flex. Okay, so now that I have all my lock nuts on, because they're just a spring-formed steel, they don't take a whole lot of tightening. Okay, so you never want to use an impact on those. You just want to tighten down with a wrench until you feel good about it. Okay. There. Okay, that's all the transmission side. Now we're going to do the drive shaft side. Tight. 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 Okay, all I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my center brace in. I'm going to tighten down the bearing support, and at that point I can take this away because the transmission is now in a position where it can sustain itself up there. Alright. Bearing support bracket on, lock washer and nut on. Alright, now it's time for the center support. Alright, now we can take the transmission support out of the way. Okay, so that part of the job is done. So the next thing we got to do is we're going to press in the new universal joints tomorrow, and then we're going to start in on putting air conditioning in the GTV. So look forward to that one.